Good morning. This morning I will speak to you about pulmonary circulation. Now, during the course of the lecture, we shall look at hemodynamics of pulmonary circulation. We shall look at the major differences between the systemic and pulmonary circulation. We shall see how the blood flows to the lungs in the different zones. We shall also look at the control of the pulmonary circulation, both chemical and physical. And lastly, we will look at a few scenarios where there is an imbalance in the fluid exchange to the pulmonary capillaries, leading to pulmonary edema. So, if we look at this picture here, we can see that there are two circulations, the greater circulation or the systemic circulation and the pulmonary circulation. So as we have seen in the CVS, all the deoxygenated blood which comes into the right atrium goes into the right ventricle, and from there on, via the pulmonary trunk into the left and the right pulmonary artery. And this blood flowing through the pulmonary capillaries is oxygenated, and carbon dioxide is given off. And the oxygenated blood returns to the left atrium by the four pulmonary veins, and then passes on via the bicuspid valve or the mitral valve into the left ventricle. From here on, we have the aorta, which carries the blood to the rest of the circulation. So if you look at the two differences here, you see that the mean pressures in the systemic arteries are very high, close to 100 millimeters of mercury. But the mean pressures in the pulmonary circulation are a lot lower at 15 millimeters of mercury. So this is the major difference between the pulmonary and the systemic circulation. So we also call the pulmonary circulation as the central circulation or the lesser circulation, and the systemic circulation is also called peripheral circulation or the greater circulation. And as I have already told you, the major difference in the two is the pulmonary circulation is a low pressure circulation, whereas the systemic circulation is high pressure circulation. So all the pressure, the systolic pressure, the diastolic pressure, the pulse pressure, mean pressure, all are a lot lower relative to the systemic circulation. If you look at this, we all know the systemic circulation, the systolic pressure is 120 to 150 millimeters. In the case of the pulmonary circulation, the mean pressure is only 20 to 25, whereas the diastolic pressure is 6 to 12. But we also know that the systemic circulation has a lot higher pressure, 62. The diastolic in this can be 60 to 80, whereas the pulse pressure is 12 to 15 in pulmonary circulation, 40 to 15 with the systemic circulation. Likewise, the mean pressures, we already discussed this, are a lot lower, 15 millimeters in the pulmonary circulation, 100 millimeters in the systemic circulation. The venous pressures are more or less similar, with 8 millimeters of pressure in the pulmonary veins, whereas in the systemic veins the pressure is close to 10 millimeters of pressure. Now, if you look at the differences anatomically, you will find that the walls of the pulmonary artery are only about 30% that of the aorta. So the aorta has got a thicker wall. The branches are, the walls are thin in case of pulmonary artery, thick in case of the systemic artery. The lumen is a lot larger, but because of the thick wall, the lumen is narrower in case of systemic circulation. The pulmonary circulation as well as the systemic circulation are both innervated very richly by the sympathetic nerve fibers, and stimulation of these fibers will cause vasoconstriction. But there is no resting tone, or what is called the vasomotor tone, in case of pulmonary arteries, whereas the tone is resting vasoconstrictor tone is very high in case of systemic circulation. Hence, the peripheral circulation in case of the pulmonary circuit is lower, whereas the systemic circuit, the pressures are, the resistance is a lot higher. The most important difference between these two circuits is the response to hypoxia. In case of pulmonary circulation, hypoxia causes vasoconstriction. The reason for this, we shall look at it when we talk about the ventilation perfusion ratio. Whereas the systemic circulation, the response to hypoxia with a vasodilatation. Other differences include the capillaries, which are shorter and wider in case of the pulmonary circuit, but are longer and narrower in case of the systemic arteries. The pressures, as expected, are a lot lower, around 7 millimeters in the pulmonary circuit and 17 millimeters in the systemic circuit. The resistance we already saw, like in the artery, is lower in the capillaries as well, whereas the resistance is higher in the systemic capillaries. Most importantly, the blood flow is pulsatile, it is not continuous like in the systemic circulation. So this is one very characteristic feature of the blood flow in the pulmonary capillaries, where it is pulsatile, whereas in the systemic circuit it is continuous. The exchange in the pulmonary circuit occurs across a respiratory membrane. It is a very specialized feature of the pulmonary circuit, whereas in case of the systemic circulation, exchange occurs across a single layer of endothelium. Also, the interstitial fluid is absent in case of the pulmonary circuit, whereas interstitial fluid is present in case of the systemic circuit. This is important, as we shall see, that any increase in the interstitial fluid will cause a problem of diffusion. Hence, in case of alveolar edema, gaseous exchange will be hampered. So if you look at the interstitial fluid pressure, it is a lot higher in case of the pulmonary circuit, whereas in case of the systemic circuit, it is a lot lower. The lymphatics are abundant. This is again a feature which prevents the accumulation of fluid in the interstitial fluid, whereas it is relatively few in case of the systemic circuits. As we all know since our class days, school days, pulmonary veins will carry the deoxygenated blood, whereas the systemic veins carry the oxygenated blood. The reservoir function of pulmonary arteries is a minor function. Pulmonary circuit holds close to 450 ml of blood, whereas the systemic circuit stores a lot more, up to 1 liter of blood. The energy for the blood flow in case of the pulmonary circuit comes from kinetic energy, whereas in case of systemic circulation, the energy for the blood flow comes from potential energy. The pressure gradients are high in case of pulmonary circuit, but low in the systemic circuit. So the velocity is high in the pulmonary circuit and low in the systemic circuit. Now the pulmonary circuit has got two major circulations. One is the bronchial circulation, which supplies the pulmonary capillary network, and this forms the majority of the blood flow. 99% of the blood flows through the pulmonary circuit. The other circuit is the bronchial artery by way of the bronchial artery. This supplies most bronchi, the bronchioles, the bronchi, as well as the segment and the bronchioles. And this ultimately drains into the bronchial vein, which joins the gyrus and ultimately drains into your vena cava. So these are the two major circuits. The differences between these two being the blood flow in the lungs occurs in two ways. One is a high pressure, low flow circulation going through the bronchial arteries. The pressure in these bronchial arteries is slightly lower than the aortic pressure, though this is simply because they are direct branches arising out of the aorta, and these supply the trachea, the bronchial tree, the terminal bronchiole, the adventitia of the pulmonary arteries, as well as the veins. So in brief, the high pressure, low flow circulation provides nutrition to all the supporting tissues of the lung. The other circuit is a venous low pressure high flow circuit in which the venous blood flows through the alveolar capillaries. Gas exchange occurs across these capillaries, and this is basically consists of the pulmonary veins will flow into the left atrium, carrying the oxygenated blood, from where it will be going to the left ventricle via the bicuspid or the mitral valve, and ultimately this will be pumped out by the left ventricle into the systemic circulation. Now we should also know something about the pulmonary capillary wedge pressure. Now, the pulmonary capillary wedge pressure is the mean pressure in the left atrium and the major pulmonary veins. Approximately it is 2 millimeters in the recumbent human being. Of course, the range can be between 1 to 5 millimeters of pressure. So how you measure this is you introduce a catheter into the peripheral vein and just let it float in. So what will happen is from the peripheral vein it will enter into the right heart, go through the tricuspid valve, enter the right atrium, then into the pulmonary artery via the pulmonary valve, and ultimately it will float in the lung till it goes and wedges tightly in one of the bronchioles, major branches of the pulmonary artery. So the place where it lodges, the pressure which you record is known as the pulmonary capillary wedge pressure, because this is where the balloon goes and lodges. Usually these pressures are 2 to 3 millimeters higher than the pressure in the left atrium. The reason we measure this is any increase in the pulmonary capillary wedge pressure is an indication that there is an increase in the left atrial pressure. Now, this is important because we want to know how the potential damage because of the high left atrial pressure, this can lead to stagnation of flow in the pulmonary circuit, and hence it can lead to alveolar edema, and we all know that alveolar edema is dangerous. So we want to prevent this. So this becomes a useful tool in case of congestive cardiac failure, where we want to know whether the left atrial pressures are rising or not, and we want to know whether the patient is at risk of developing a pulmonary edema. So if you look at the pulmonary capillary network, the capillaries are of two types, either situated within the alveolus, where we call them the intra-alveolar vessels, or they may be lying outside on the bronchioles, and these are called the extra-alveolar vessels. Now each alveolus sits in a bed of capillaries. The mean velocity of the pulmonary artery and its branches is around 40 centimeters per second, and the time required for the blood to flow through these capillaries is 0.75 seconds, that is 3/4 of a second. Now, in case of exercise, the time for transit in the pulmonary circuit may decrease, but this does not alter the absorption of gases or the transfer of gases. The reason for this is, even though the blood remains in the pulmonary circuit for 75.75 seconds, the exchange occurs only in the first 1/3. That means in the first 0.25 seconds itself, the gas exchange is complete. So even though during exercise the transit time comes down, it will not change or hamper the transfer of gases. If you look at the pulmonary vasculature, it is less extensive than the systemic vessels. It has a large compliance, almost similar to the entire vascular tree, and in both cases it is around 7 ml per mmHg. What do you understand by compliance? Compliance is the rate of change of volume, the volume ratio of change in volume to the change in pressure. So if you increase the pressure by 7 millimeters, the volume will increase by 7 millimeters. That is what compliance means. So in case of pulmonary, resistance is also lower, and it resembles mostly like the venous circuit because the pressures are closer to the venous pressures in the systemic circulation. So the pressure in the pulmonary arteries is almost equal to that in the systemic veins. So this is because the pulmonary vasculature is highly distensible. It holds a high volume of blood and it is at a low pressure. If you look at the pulmonary blood flow, it is equal to the cardiac output. And if you can remember, cardiac output is the amount of blood pumped by each ventricle per minute. So the left ventricle is pumping 5 ml, means the right ventricle is also pumping 5 ml. And this is the cardiac output which goes to the lungs. So from the right it enters the pulmonary circulation, from the left it enters the systemic circulation. And this is dependent upon the relationship between three pressures. The pressure in the pulmonary artery, which is denoted by the PPA, the pressure in the pulmonary veins, which is denoted by the pressure PV, and the pressure in the alveolus PL, which is usually 0. Now the blood flow is directly dependent on the pressure in the artery minus the pressure in the alveolus. So anywhere where there is a fall in the concentration of oxygen, this will lead to a decrease in the local alveolar blood flow. So hence the oxygen also regulates the distribution, and the pulmonary blood flow is determined by radioactive xenon. Or you can also use albumin labeled with radioactive iodine I-131. Now what is the effect of hydrostatic pressure? So hydrostatic pressure is simply because of the weight of the blood itself. So what we're talking about here is the blood in the lungs, because of gravity, will affect flow to different reasons. So if you see the lung, it is around 30 centimeters tall, and approximately there's a difference in the pressure of about 23 millimeters. So if you look at 15 millimeters above the hilux, it is 15 millimeters high. Below it is 8 millimeters. So we are looking at the pressure in the pulmonary artery at the hilum, it is 25. At the apex, you take away the 15, so you are left with 10, and below you are also coming with at the 5, so we're adding to the weight of the blood column here. So the base, at the base you have the pressures of 33 by 20 millimeters of mercury. So this is simply because of the weight of the blood. So based on this, we will look at the zones of the blood flow. So in the zone 1, we are looking at the alveolar capillary pressure and the blood flow. So if you look at the alveolar capillary pressure, it is always less than that of the alveolar air pressure. So technically in this zone there is zero blood flow throughout the cardiac cycle. Now look at the zone 2, which is the middle layers. Here the alveolar pressure is more during systole only. So in this case the blood flow will occur mostly during systole. Whereas if you look at the zone 3, in this case the alveolar capillary pressure is always more than your alveolar air pressure throughout the cardiac cycle. So the blood flow at the bases of the lungs will occur throughout the cardiac cycle. So technically you have divided the lung into 3 zones: the apex, the middle zones, and the bases. The bases will receive blood throughout the cardiac cycle. The middle zones receive blood only during systole, and theoretically blood flow does not flow to the apices of the heart. But we know this is not possible. The zero flow is always pathological. That means that this occurs in case of the positive air pressure, or the pulmonary artery systolic pressure is exceedingly low, as can occur in case of hemorrhages. The middle zone, up to 11 centimeters above midline of the heart, you will have the intermittent flow, which is mostly during systole. And in the base, below 10 centimeters from the mid-level of the heart, you have a continuous blood flow, because in this zone we have seen blood flows throughout the cardiac cycle. So what is the function of this pulmonary circulation? So this acts as a major zone for exchange of the respiratory gases. So the pulmonary artery will give off all the oxygen, the carbon dioxide, and will pick up all the oxygen from the lungs, so that the veins which receive the blood from the pulmonary capillaries can carry this oxygenated back to the left side of the heart, from where it can be pumped into the systemic circulation. The other function is that of a reservoir. It also acts as a filter for removing emboli. Now, if the emboli are small, they excite the J receptors, leading to the J reflex, where there is a reflex in the increase in the pressure in the pulmonary artery, which leads to an increase in the pulmonary capillary pressure. This increases the filtration, and once the filtration increases, the small emboli are cleared by the macrophages. Now, if these emboli are large, they can block. They have the potential to block the pulmonary artery, leading to pulmonary thromboembolism. But they are broken into smaller fragments before they are cleared by the macrophages. The third important function is it helps in the synthesis of ACE, or what is called the angiotensin converting enzyme. This is synthesized by the pulmonary capillary endothelium. If you look at the reservoir function of the lungs, 4 to 450, or approximately 9% of the total blood volume remains in the lungs. Of course, this can vary between half the normal up to 2 times the normal. That means the lungs can hold from 225 milliliters to 900 ml of blood, of which 70 ml is in the pulmonary capillaries. The remainder is equally distributed between the pulmonary arteries and the pulmonary veins. Now, of this, 250 ml is expelled from the pulmonary circulation into the systemic circulation. Now, this occurs either physically, like when the person is blowing a trumpet, so the air pressure, alveolar pressure goes high, and it will distribute the blood, squeeze out the blood from these capillaries and push it towards the pulmonary veins. It can also occur as a pathological conditions like in hemorrhage. So, to compensate for the low volume of blood in the systemic circulation, blood from the pulmonary circuit may be transferred into the systemic circulation to cover for or compensate for the low volume. Now, how do you regulate the pulmonary blood flow? So there are two mechanisms, the neural mechanism and the chemical mechanism. The neural mechanism basically acts on the pulmonary arteries and the veins. So you have all these arteries and veins, they have alpha 1 receptors, like most blood vessels. So stimulation of these alpha 1 receptors leads to a vasoconstriction. Likewise, stimulation of the alpha 2 or the beta 2 and the M3 receptors, which are abundant on these pulmonary arteries and veins, will cause a vasodilatation. The other mechanism is a chemical regulation, whereby any vasodilator, like a fall in the oxygen or hypoxia, a rise in the carbon dioxide, what is also called as hypercarbia, or an increase in the hydrogen ion concentration, all these can cause vasoconstriction. Now, this is almost different from the systemic circuit, where all these will cause a vasodilatation. So, what is a vasodilator metabolite in the peripheral circuit or the systemic circulation is a vasoconstrictor in case of the pulmonary circulation. So, any fall in the blood flow to the lungs will decrease the alveolar PCO2 and it will lead to a bronchoconstriction. This causes the shifting of the blood of the ventilation from purely perfused areas. This is, see, the mechanism here is so well made. So suppose a particular zone of the lung is not getting adequate ventilation. If you supply blood to this area, it is of no use. So what the body wisely does is it diverts this blood to an alveolus which is better ventilated so that the gas exchange can occur. So there is no point supplying blood to a poorly ventilated alveolus. So anywhere where there is a bronchoconstriction, a fall in the PCO2 will occur. Then you look at systemic hypoxia. will cause a constriction of the pulmonary artery, leading to an increase in the pulmonary artery pressure. If you look at the other ways of regulating, there is active factors whereby a cervical sympathetic ganglion stimulation will lead to a vasoconstriction, and this can decrease the blood flow up to 30%. Now you also have certain passive factors like your cardiac output. When you exercise, the cardiac output goes up and the blood flow increases. Likewise, we've already seen the effect of gravity on the three zones of the lung. The apex is hardly getting any circulation. The middle zones getting circular flow only during systole, and the lower zones which are receiving blood flow continuously. The PO2 also, or the partial pressure of oxygen, also affects blood flow. As we have seen, a fall in the PO2 means the alveoli is ill ventilated. So blood flow is wasted if you supply blood to these ill ventilated alveolus. So any fall in the PO2 in the pulmonary vein blood or hypoxia will cause a pulmonary vasoconstriction, and in the systemic circulation the same hypoxia can cause a vasodilatation, and the effects are both beneficial in both zones. So if you want to increase the pulmonary blood flow, this can occur in heavy exercises. You will see that the blood flow increases from 4 to 7 times. Now how does this occur? This is by two ways. Either you have a recruitment, the other way is distension. Distension is very easy to understand. So you have most of these capillaries which are open. Now in case of distension, there is simply a vasodilatation. So you'll find that when there's a vasodilatation, the blood flow will increase. So this is distension. The other way is recruitment. Recruitment means some of the capillaries are not open or patent, but during exercise, when the metabolic demand increases, these capillaries which are closed, these will also be open. So this is called recruitment of capillaries, thereby increasing the capillary density. So recruitment increases the blood flow by 3 times, whereas distension increases the blood flow by approximately 2 times. Now both will lead to a fall in the pulmonary vascular resistance, and it will cause an increase in the pressure of the pulmonary artery. What about the time for gas exchange? As I've already discussed, even 0.25 seconds. Most of the gas exchange occurs in the first 0.25 seconds in the pulmonary capillaries. So when you exercise, the normal transit time in the pulmonary capillaries is decreased from 0.75 seconds to 0.3 seconds. But this is adequate to allow adequate gas exchange across the pulmonary capillaries. Now, we also should know something about the pulmonary dead space and the pulmonary shunt. Dead space is a place where the pressures in the artery is decreased, or the partial pressure or the pressure in the alveoli is increased. Either can lead to a collapse of the pulmonary capillaries. So hence, there is no gas exchange. In case of shunts, it could be a physiological shunt, like some of the veins which are draining in the atrium are actually carrying deoxygenated blood, like your anterior cardiac and the thespian veins. Now this forms part of the anatomical shunt. Likewise, you can also have the bronchial capillaries which are draining into the pulmonary capillaries and veins. They are also carrying your deoxygenated blood. All this is mixed in the left atrium. So when you look at the final concentration of oxygen in the left ventricle, which is being supplied to the systemic circulation, you'll find that it is lower than 100%, which is the partial pressure of oxygen in the alveolus. This is because of the mixing of small amounts of venous blood with the arterial blood. You can also have anatomical AV shunts, which will also contribute to the mixing. Likewise, you'll find that the partial pressure of oxygen in the systemic arteries is 2 mm less than that in the alveolar artery, for the reason which I have explained. You also have the hemoglobin saturation, which will be around 0.5% less. Next, we move on to the pressures causing fluid movement. So you have 3 structures here: the capillary, in which you have the blood flowing through this. then you have the alveolus, and in between you have these lymphatics. Now, in the interstitial space, the fluid in this space will be determined by the pressures which are trying to increase the space. This can occur either by an increased filtration of the from the capillaries, or because of an increased oncotic pressure in the interstitial space. If you look at the surface tension in the alveolus, it is -8. So whatever fluid comes from the hydrostatic pressure here, which is the pressure in the capillaries, you have +8 in the capillaries, as we have already seen, +7 in the capillaries, and 8 in the -8 in the interstitial space. So there is a partial vacuum here, which will tend to pull the fluid from the capillary into the lungs. But there is no exchange between the alveolus and the interstitial spaces. The other is the osmotic pressure. Now, because of the high protein which is there in the capillary, you have a negative pressure. That means it is going to reabsorb the fluid. Likewise, there is a negative pressure in case of the interstitial fluid as well, which is trying to pull in the fluids. So combination of these two will give you differences in these two because they are acting in opposite direction. The oncotic pressure in case of the capillary is trying to pull it in. The oncotic pressure of the interstitium is trying to pull it out. So when you subtract these two, you will get a net of -14, yes. And you will find that this -14, -7, -8, so this is going to be added. So 15 minus 14 is equal to +1. So this is the net pressure with which the fluid is going to go out. So basically, it's a very small gradient between the capillary and the interstitium. And even then, whatever fluid does manage to escape into the interstitial space, this will be immediately taken up by the lymphatic capillary because here the pressures are negative. So there will be a tendency to go from here into these capillaries. So most of the time, the lung is kept very, very dry. Now, if there's a problem, so if there's an increased filtration from the capillaries, the fluid can accumulate either around the vessels, which are close to the bronchus. So this is called the perivascular spaces. So they can cover the perivascular spaces, or they can escape into the alveolar space and into the alveolus. Now, this is going to be difficult because the gas exchange will be occurred, because diffusion will be affected. So these are the two ways in which fluid exchange across capillaries, any alteration in this will lead to an interstitial edema or an alveolar edema. Now the pulmonary edema occurs any time when the pressure in the pulmonary capillaries becomes more than the plasma colloid oncotic pressure. So for this we have a safety factor. That means if there is a pressure up to 25, rise up to 21 millimeters of mercury, you are safe. This is what is shown in the graph below. So you are looking at the rate of edema formation, which is equal to the edema fluid per hour by the dry weight of the lung, and you look at the left atrial pressure. So till you reach a point of 21 millimeters of pressure, as long as the LA pressure is up to 21 millimeters of pressure, you find that there is no fluid which is going to form or escape into the interstitial fluid. But beyond this, as you go on, you'll find that beyond 22, 23, fluid starts escaping into the lungs. And by 35, you'll see there's a 50 mm pressure. Now, how fast this pulmonary edema develops will determine whether it's harmful or not. So in case of an acute pulmonary edema, the safety factor is only 21 because you have no time to adjust, or there are no compensatory mechanisms. But in case of a chronic pulmonary edema, that means it is developing at a much slower rate, the safety factor is 40 to 45. Now, in this case, the pulmonary edema can occur when you exercise at a high altitude, or you have a left ventricular failure, as we have seen, or you have a mitral valve disease, especially a regurgitation, or a stenosis. Both can increase the volumes or pressures on the left side, leading to a left heart failure and ultimately development of a pulmonary edema. or any damage to the pulmonary capillary membrane can also result in enema, like in case of pneumonias. Toxic gases like chlorides and sulfur dioxide can also damage the pulmonary capillary membrane and lead to pulmonary edema. The second important clinical scenario is of pleural effusion, which is analogous to the edema fluid. Causes of a pleural effusion is any blockage of the lymphatic drainage. In case of cardiac failure, where the pressure in the capillaries is high and increases the transduction or the escape of fluid from the capillaries, or any case where there is a fall in the plasma colloid oncotic pressure, as can occur in a liver disease. This again will prevent the fluid from coming into or remaining in the capillary because there's less albumin now. So again, it leads to an increased transduction. Any infection, any inflammation can also damage the capillary membrane. So again, this can lead to a pleural effusion. So it leads to the dumping of the plasma proteins and fluids in the space between the two pleura. So this is called the accumulation of fluid between the two, the parietal and the visceral pleura causes a pleural effusion. So in summary, there are two circulations. One is a high pressure, low flow circuit. The other is a low pressure, high flow circuit in the pulmonary circuits. There are three zones of blood flow in the lungs: the apex, the middle portions, and the base. Because of gravity, the apices are always at the pressure in the alveolus is always higher than the capillary. So there is zero blood flow in the apices theoretically. The middle zones get blood flow only during systole, whereas the bases will get flow throughout the cardiac cycle or at all times. Now, regulation can be active or it could be passive. It can be neural, it can be chemical. The response to hypoxia in case of pulmonary circuit is a vasoconstriction, whereas in case of the systemic circulation, it causes a vasodilatation. Exercise can increase the blood flow 4 to 7 times, and it occurs by two mechanisms, either by passive factors or active factors. Active factors will include your distension or recruitment, also factors like the cardiac output will also affect. So any alterations in the pulmonary blood flow will lead to either a pulmonary edema or a pleural effusion. These are my references. Thank you so much.